Do you support Jeremy?
In many ways, no. I've said many times before, the man is a knob.
The stone started flying at 3:47 p.m. on October 2nd, 2014, as Jeremy Clarkson's Porsche 928 sat surrounded by an angry mob in Argentina. The license plate read H982FKL, and to the veterans and politicians gathering around the car, those letters meant war. What followed was a terrifying chase to the border that nearly cost the Top Gear crew their lives, but this wasn't the first time Clarkson's controversies had turned dangerous, and it wouldn't be the last. If you've ever wondered how Britain's most successful television export became its most toxic workplace, hit that like button now, because the pattern of scandals we're about to expose reveals how one man's inability to control himself destroyed an entire cultural institution. The Argentina incident didn't happen in isolation. It came after years of escalating controversies that had already put Clarkson on thin ice with BBC management. The corporation had been fielding complaints about his behaviour since 2008, when he made a controversial joke about truck drivers that sparked outrage from unions and politicians. But instead of addressing the underlying issue, executives chose to handle each crisis separately, never realizing they were facing a pattern of behavior that was bound to erupt sooner or later. The early warning signs were there for anyone paying attention. In 2008, during a Top Gear segment where Clarkson was behind the wheel of a lorry, he cracked a joke linking lorry drivers to violence. Viewers immediately recognized how inappropriate it was, since it played into damaging stereotypes about the trucking industry. Trade union representatives quickly pushed back, demanding an apology and pointing out that comments like that unfairly portrayed drivers as dangerous and only added to the stigma surrounding their work. But rather than taking the criticism seriously, the BBC treated it as an isolated incident that could be managed with a quiet word and a non-apology apology. This response set a dangerous precedent that would define the corporation's relationship with Clarkson for the next 7 years. Each controversy was treated as a separate crisis, rather than evidence of systematic problems that needed addressing before they got worse. The pattern escalated significantly with the racial controversies that began emerging around 2011. Multiple incidents involved Clarkson using or nearly using deeply offensive racial language, including material so problematic that it couldn't be broadcast even on a show known for pushing boundaries. The Burma special controversy involved remarks that were deemed so inappropriate they had to be edited out, while unaired footage from later series contained material that would have ended the career of any presenter without Clarkson's commercial value. What made these incidents particularly troubling was the context in which they occurred. Top Gear wasn't just a British television show, it was the BBC's most successful international export, broadcast in over 200 countries and generating approximately £50 million annually through sales, merchandising and live events. Clarkson's behaviour wasn't just embarrassing the corporation domestically, it was damaging Britain's soft power projection and making international sales increasingly difficult as foreign broadcasters grew wary of associating with potentially toxic content. The racist remarks also revealed something disturbing about the production culture surrounding Top Gear. These weren't spontaneous slip-ups caught on hot microphones. They were comments made in front of full production crews, often during scripted segments or rehearsed presentations. The fact that such material was being created at all suggests that normal professional standards had been so eroded that nobody felt empowered to challenge obviously inappropriate content before it reached the editing room. The international implications became even more serious when Clarkson's controversies began affecting diplomatic relations. The Argentina incident was preceded by several other overseas filming trips that had generated complaints from foreign governments and cultural organizations. A pattern was emerging where Top Gear's international specials, supposedly designed to showcase different countries and cultures, were instead becoming sources of offense and embarrassment that required diplomatic cleanup. The Argentina number plate controversy itself remains one of the most contentious aspects of the entire Top Gear scandal timeline. The registration H982FKL was legitimately associated with the 1989 Porsche 928 GT since the day it rolled off the production line, making it technically impossible for the plate to have been chosen specifically for the Argentina trip. However, industry insiders have suggested that the truth lies somewhere between pure coincidence and deliberate provocation. What seems most likely is that someone on the Top Gear production team came across this particular car during their search for suitable vehicles and couldn't resist the opportunity for subtle controversy. The temptation to include a reference to the 1982 Falklands War while filming in Argentina would have been irresistible to a team known for pushing boundaries and courting controversy. Whether this was officially sanctioned or represented freelance mischief-making by production staff remains unclear, but the end result was the same, a dangerous situation that could have cost lives. The violent reaction from Argentine veterans and politicians escalated far beyond anything the production team had anticipated. What may have been intended as a subtle provocation became a full-scale international incident when locals interpreted the plate as a deliberate reference to the Falklands conflict. The crew found themselves surrounded by angry mobs, with stones flying and genuine threats of physical violence that forced them to abandon their vehicles and equipment in a desperate escape to the Chilean border. The Argentina incident should have been a wake-up call for both Clarkson and BBC management about how dangerous their approach to controversy had become. Instead of generating harmless publicity that boosted ratings, they were now creating situations that threatened crew safety and damaged international relations. But rather than using this crisis as an opportunity to reset professional standards, the corporation treated it as another isolated incident that could be managed with public relations damage control. By this point, BBC executives were trapped in an impossible position. They knew Clarkson's behavior was problematic and getting worse, but Top Gear generated such massive revenue that losing him seemed financially catastrophic. The show wasn't just profitable in isolation, it was a cornerstone of the BBC's commercial operations, funding other programming and justifying the license fee to politicians who measured success in international sales figures rather than cultural impact. This financial dependency created a toxic dynamic where normal professional standards were gradually abandoned in favor of protecting the golden goose. Complaints about Clarkson's behavior were managed rather than addressed, with executives focusing on limiting damage rather than preventing future incidents. The message sent to everyone involved was clear: commercial success trumped professional conduct, and normal workplace rules didn't apply to sufficiently valuable talent. The final warning that Clarkson received from the BBC in May 2014 should have marked a turning point, but instead it simply formalized the dysfunctional relationship that had already developed. Rather than being a genuine attempt to modify his behavior, the warning became just another crisis management tool that allowed executives to point to decisive action while actually changing nothing about the underlying culture that enabled problematic conduct. Clarkson's response to the final warning revealed how little he understood about the seriousness of his situation. Rather than recognizing it as a last chance to modify his behavior, he seemed to treat it as confirmation that he was untouchable as long as the show remained profitable. His comments to the media suggested that he viewed the warning as performative rather than substantive, failing to grasp that even his commercial value had limits. The toxic workplace culture that had developed around Top Gear extended far beyond Clarkson's personal behavior to affect the entire production environment. Filming schedules were notoriously punishing, with crews working impossible hours in challenging international locations to capture the ambitious content that made the show distinctive. The pressure cooker environment that produced spectacular television also created conditions where normal professional standards were gradually eroded. Former crew members have described a culture where everything was subordinated to getting the shot, regardless of safety concerns or professional boundaries. The pursuit of dramatic content took precedence over basic workplace protections, with staff expected to endure conditions and treatment that would be unacceptable in any other professional environment. This culture didn't just enable Clarkson's behavior, it actively encouraged the kind of risk-taking and boundary pushing that made such behavior seem normal. The personal pressures affecting Clarkson during this period also played a role in the escalating pattern of controversies. His divorce proceedings were becoming increasingly acrimonious and public, adding personal stress to the professional pressures of maintaining his position as television's highest-paid presenter. The combination of personal and professional stress created a perfect storm that made explosive behavior increasingly likely. However, personal problems don't excuse professional misconduct, and Clarkson's situation wasn't unique among high-pressure television personalities. What made his case different was the institutional enabling that allowed personal stress to translate into workplace toxicity without meaningful intervention or support. The BBC's failure to provide appropriate support or set clear boundaries meant that personal crisis inevitably became everyone else's problem. The final fracas in March 2015 was almost inevitable given this escalating pattern of behavior and institutional enabling. The incident occurred after another exhausting day of filming, with Clarkson tired, hungry, and apparently past the point where he could control his temper. According to reports that emerged later, the presenter aimed a punch at producer Oisin Timon during a confrontation about the lack of hot food following a long shooting day in North Yorkshire. What makes this incident particularly tragic is how predictable it was to anyone who had been paying attention to the warning signs. The combination of exhausting filming schedules, personal stress, normalized workplace toxicity, and institutional enabling had created conditions where physical violence was almost inevitable. The only surprise was that it had taken so long to happen, not that it happened at all. The immediate aftermath of the incident revealed how unprepared the BBC was to handle the crisis they had been inadvertently creating for years. Rather than having clear protocols for dealing with workplace violence, executives seemed shocked that their management strategy of tolerating increasingly problematic behavior had finally led to actual physical assault. The corporation's response was chaotic and contradictory, suggesting that nobody had seriously planned for the possibility that their most valuable presenter might cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The human cost of this workplace culture fell hardest on producer Oisin Timon, who became the target of death threats from fans who blamed him for ending their favorite show. The fact that a producer doing his job could become a hate figure reveals how toxic the relationship between show and audience had become. Viewers had been encouraged to see Clarkson as the hero of every story, making it impossible for them to recognize situations where he might actually be the villain. Timon's treatment by both media and public opinion demonstrated the complete breakdown of normal professional standards around Top Gear. In any other workplace, a victim of physical assault would receive sympathy and support, but Timon found himself vilified for reporting an incident that any reasonable person would consider unacceptable. The fact that this response was predictable doesn't make it any less disturbing or unjust. The broader cultural implications of the Top Gear scandals extend far beyond one television show to reveal uncomfortable truths about celebrity culture, institutional enabling, and the commercialization of offense. The show's success had become dependent on controversy, creating a dynamic where increasingly extreme behavior was required to maintain audience interest and media coverage. This wasn't sustainable in the long term, but everyone involved seemed to believe they could manage the risks indefinitely. The international damage caused by years of Top Gear controversies affected Britain's soft power projection and cultural reputation in ways that are still being felt today. The show that was supposed to showcase British creativity, engineering excellence, and cultural confidence instead became associated with offensive behaviour, diplomatic incidents, and workplace toxicity. The cost to Britain's international reputation far exceeded any revenue generated by courting controversy. The pattern of escalating controversies also revealed the limitations of commercial success as a justification for problematic behavior. While Top Gear generated massive profits for the BBC, the long-term costs of enabling toxic workplace culture and offensive content eventually exceeded any financial benefits. The show's commercial success became a trap that prevented necessary reforms until it was too late to save anything. The aftermath demonstrated how hollow the show's success had actually become. Without Clarkson's controversial personality, attempts to continue Top Gear with new presenters consistently failed to capture either the audience numbers or cultural impact of the original format. Chris Evans, Paddy McGuinness, and other replacement presenters discovered that the show's appeal was inextricably linked to personalities that couldn't be replicated without also importing their problematic elements. This revealed an uncomfortable truth about the show's success. Much of its appeal was based on viewers' vicarious enjoyment of behavior they knew was inappropriate. The chemistry between presenters was real and entertaining, but it was amplified by the transgressive thrill of watching people break social rules and get away with it. When those rules were finally enforced, the show lost its essential appeal and never recovered. The legal and regulatory implications of the Top Gear scandals continue to influence how television companies handle difficult talent and controversial content. The case established precedents for when commercial considerations must yield to professional standards and demonstrated the risks of allowing workplace culture to deteriorate in pursuit of short-term profits. Employment lawyers have used the Top Gear case as an example of how institutional enabling can escalate workplace problems until they become legally and financially catastrophic. The BBC's handling of Clarkson's behaviour provided a textbook example of how not to manage problematic employees, regardless of their commercial value to the organisation. The regulatory response also influenced broadcasting standards and international sales practices. The repeated controversies made it clear that offensive content creates long-term commercial risks that outweigh any short-term publicity benefits. International broadcasters became more cautious about acquiring potentially controversial programming, affecting the entire British television export industry. The deeper lesson from the Top Gear scandals concerns the relationship between entertainment value and social responsibility. The show's success proved that audiences will reward transgressive behavior, but it also demonstrated that this success is ultimately unsustainable when it conflicts with basic professional and ethical standards. The entertainment industry continues to grapple with this tension between commercial success and social responsibility. The Top Gear experience also highlighted the dangers of building entertainment formats around individual personalities rather than sustainable creative concepts. When the show became inseparable from Clarkson's controversial persona, it became impossible to continue when that persona became too toxic to support. This vulnerability affected not just the BBC but everyone whose livelihoods depended on the show's continued success. For viewers who love Top Gear's ambitious international specials, spectacular car reviews and presenter chemistry, the tragedy is that none of it needed to end this way. The show's core appeal, celebrating automotive culture, exploring international locations, and showcasing engineering excellence, could have continued indefinitely with proper professional standards and respect for colleagues and cultures. Instead, the pursuit of controversy for its own sake gradually corrupted everything that made the show genuinely entertaining. The authentic enthusiasm for cars and engineering that originally drove the format was increasingly overshadowed by manufactured outrage and deliberate provocation. By the time the final crisis hit, very little of the original appeal remained beneath the toxic surface. The pattern revealed by the Top Gear scandals, escalating controversy leading to institutional crisis, has since been repeated across the entertainment industry. The case serves as a cautionary tale about the true cost of enabling problematic behavior in pursuit of commercial success, demonstrating that short-term profits from controversial figures can create long-term institutional damage that far exceeds any financial benefits. Understanding this pattern is crucial for preventing similar disasters in the future. The warning signs were clear, the escalation was predictable, and the ending was entirely preventable, but everyone involved chose short-term profits over long-term sustainability until it was too late to save anything. The real scandal isn't any single incident but the systematic normalization of toxic behavior that made disaster inevitable. If this investigation into the real Top Gear scandals has opened your eyes to how toxic workplace culture can destroy even the most successful institutions, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more deep dives into entertainment industry failures. Tell us in the comments, did you recognize the warning signs at the time, or were you as surprised as everyone else when it all came crashing down? The patterns revealed here apply to more than just one television show, and understanding them might help prevent similar disasters in the future.